Welcome back, Motorheads. Today we're going to talk about some unbelievable 1990s sleeper cars. Yes, you heard me right. 1990s era sleeper cars. Yeah, I know most people don't think 1990s and think sleeper car are all in the same thought, but hey, I'm going to introduce you to a few today. First, we're going to talk about the 1994 Chevrolet Impala SS. Now, you see the letters SS, you know something special about it. Well, in most cases, it means there should be something special about it. This car here boasted 260 horsepower. And it was also packing 330 foot-pounds of torque to help accelerate this big beast from 0 to 60 in just around 7 seconds. Now, I know a lot of these numbers mean squat for today's vehicles, but back in the 1990s, this was actually some pretty respectable numbers these cars were putting out, especially when they were coming from your family four-door sedan. Now, if you really wanted to keep a true sleeper back then, though, you bought the Caprice and changed the exhaust and did a couple things, because this thing actually had the same motor, the 350 LT1. Unless you just had a lot more money than sense, then you took one over to Callaway and had Callaway tune it, and you got about 404 horsepower. And it had about 412 foot-pounds of torque. Now, for the money, I don't see spending that kind of money because you really only got to be a second faster. Next, we had the 1990 Mercury Cougar XR7. Now, the XR7, it looks more like a little luxury grandpa car, but Mercury wasn't screwing around here, and they actually stuck a nice supercharged little 6-cylinder 3.8 that had 210 horsepower and 315 foot-pounds of torque. Now, even though the Cougar was a luxury performance car, this thing had one thing I thought was kind of ahead of its time and was really pretty cool on these old things, was the adjustable ride control. And once again, I know that horsepower and torque rating doesn't sound like much at all, but back in the 90s, man, that was something back then. This thing broke a lot of people's hearts, man. It hurt a lot of people's feelings when they heard it was a V6. Back then, a lot of people didn't really think too much of a supercharger being on a car like this. They kind of just snuck up on you and grabbed you by the boo-boo because you weren't expecting that to come out of that little car and leave you in the dust, but they actually did, and they walked away quite efficiently from a lot of cars back then. Next, you got your Buick Roadmaster wagons. Now, these were also offered in the Caprice wagon and the Oldsmobile, but from 91 to 93, you got the wimpier version. 1994 through 1996 is when it got a little exciting, and they got a little bit more oomph under the hood. Because in 1994, they decided they wanted to go ahead and stick the same motor that was in the Impala SS, the same motor that was in the 1994 Corvette, minus the aluminum heads. You were still left with a very powerful and unsuspecting family truckster. That left many of people butthurt and still wondering what the hell was going on. They needed to go see a psychiatrist because they had nightmares. The only thing they saw was the taillights of one of them big old wagons running off and leaving them in the dust. And as a current owner of a 1994 Buick Roadmaster wagon, the look on their face is priceless when they pull up and mess with that old wagon. You cut that old beast loose, that look on their face of pure confusion and shame. I just got schooled by a wagon. You just know that's got to cause just a little bit of emotional damage. Remember, these things had the LT1 same as the Corvette and the Impala SS with 260 horsepower with that same 330 foot-pounds of torque. Now, if you're joining us for the first time here at Motorhead Misfits, thanks for coming in, stopping by and taking a look. Hope you enjoyed today's show. And if you did enjoy it, make sure you give us a like and maybe even subscribe and come back and see us. Up next, you had your 1991 through 1994 GSX all-wheel drive Mitsubishi Eclipse with its 2-liter 4G63 engine that produced up to 195 horsepower with 203 foot-pounds of torque. These were definitely some nasty little leapfrog playing little vehicles on the street. These things would just hook and book, man. These things were actually really cool. A lot of people didn't really look at them that much, and they really weren't scared of these things until they met one of these things on the street somewhere. These were actually not a bad looking car either. At least in my personal opinion, they weren't a bad looking car. Now, you had to get to 91 through 94, that way you got to all-wheel drive. The car handled great, and like I said, it was just all around a good looking car and a pretty powerful car that would definitely pin you back in the seat. Next, we have the 1997 Pontiac Grand Prix GTP. Now, they made these throughout the 2000s, but in 1997, that's when this one here got the 3.8 supercharge of the Eaton supercharger on it. And I'm going to tell you, this thing produced 240 horsepower, which was nothing to sneeze at, with 280 foot-pounds of torque coming out of a little front-wheel drive. And you can get this thing in 2-door and 4-door variants. And as a person who's owned a couple of those, without spending a fortune and a whole lot of effort, you could really make these little things move out very well. A lot better than you could get out of the 3.4, at least in my opinion. Just a few little tweaks on the 97 and up. But they were damn good cars too. Transmission, well, that was a little finicky. You had to be careful what you were doing with that damn thing. And they were a damn good looking car too. At least I thought so. Next, we had the 1993 through 1998 Lincoln Mark 8, which was still kind of a cool car, even though it was a big Lincoln, a little heavy. The body style wasn't too terrible, at least for back in those days. It was kind of futuristic and looked kind of good. Anyway, these things boasted 280 horsepower with 285 foot-pounds of torque. Now, these cars here, you had to be real careful about who was driving. If you pulled up to a stoplight and you seen this old gray-haired guy with the leather driving gloves, be prepared. He's ready to drag your ass to the next stoplight. You really got to watch out for those old guys, and some of them old ladies too, buddy. They still like to drop the hammer, especially back in those days. Now, me personally, I dig the interior in these cars. I like the way the whole dashboard, the cockpit's set up in here. I think it was a pretty cool design, personally. And those cars are very comfortable, and they do have a little ump and a little giddy up and go. And when these things first hit the street, people didn't expect these cars to move as well as they did. Now, if you were a car person back in the 90s, you just knew this was going to be on the list. Now, back in the early 90s, 1992 to 1993, they produced a GMC Cyclone, which was a very nasty little SUV. Most people pulled up beside it had no clue other than it had a fancy body kit on it. They absolutely had no idea the beast that was sitting there beside them that was about to leave them in the dust. These were just stupid fast for what they were. Now, they also had a pickup version of this, but it was 1991 only, and it was the Cyclone. This thing had 280 horsepower, 350 foot-pounds of torque, and would kick the ever-loving crap out of the Z28 from 1993. Now, if you were rocking your 1993 Z28 Camaro and this thing pulled up and left you in the dust, you obviously thought something was wrong with your car, and you were definitely in disbelief that that just happened. These things were very cool for what they were. They were very powerful, and they kind of caught you unsuspectedly if you weren't a true car guy that was reading about everything coming out on the market. Next, we had the 1991 through 1992 Dodge Spirit RT. This thing here had a 2.2 liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine that produced 224 horsepower and 217 foot-pounds of torque. Now, this car here was definitely a very unsuspecting car of having any kind of giddy up and go. If you were back in those days, you drove a couple of these cars and they were kind of, whatever. You know, they were commuter cars. But for some reason, they decided to make something a little cooler for the car guy that still needed something to get back and forth to work. So Dodge dressed it up with a little fancier body kit, gave it a little bit more flash, and they stuck a whole lot more giddy up and go under the hood with that little turbocharged 2.2. Other than that, you just got your Dodge Spirit pretty much. You know, kind of lame, honestly, but the car ran out well. I mean, a lot of people, there's a big following for these cars. A lot of guys absolutely love them. And that's fine if you like the RT. Now, if you got a big love for just a regular old little Spirit, you might want to go have yourself looked at. Maybe evaluate it or something. Well, that's all I got for you today. If you liked today's video, be sure to smash that like button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And also, if you enjoyed this kind of content, leave it down in the comments as well. We'll see you guys in the next one.